So basically, we'll get the video going, and he's just kind of setting it up, kind of introducing it, and then we'll jump into the material, and hopefully, he does a good job at setting it up. He's pretty good communicator in that regard. So I think you'll be thrilled. So give me a second to get it started here. I guess I should plug it in so you can hear it, huh?
I want to take a minute to welcome you to the study of the book Stop Running. And I want to say thank you for taking time over these coming weeks to really dive into identity formation. And we're going to unpack some themes, some ideas that are, it's kind of the intersection of Bible, bibliology, and psychology and philosophy. It's kind of like where they all converge. And we're going to really unfold some things that most people never spend a lot of time consciously thinking about, but it's unfolding all the time within us and all around us. And so we're going to dive in this first lesson into the theme of loss and into the basic foundational terms of what is identity. The reason we pair the idea of loss and identity, and I'll just set this up and then you'll dive into the lesson, to the chapter, and to the discussion. We're going to talk about what identity is, that we all have one. We work to maintain it and construct it. We're either looking within ourselves or looking external to ourselves to find that sense of self. We don't often think about it subconsciously, but it's always there. It's always riding under the surface. And when we have a strong sense of self, we generally feel good about life and about the world around us, and we're moving forward. We're standing on some solid ground. When we have events or circumstances in our life that come undone, things that we thought were stable or predictable or secure, or things we had subconsciously tied our identity to that we lose, we are left kind of floundering. And that loss, psychologically, it's more than depression, it's more than sorrow or grief, although that's all a part of it. It is often at the core a loss of a sense of self. And that will fold into it a loss of meaning, a loss of purpose, a loss of a sense of value or significance, a loss of a sense of being loved and accepted, fitting into my own story, fitting into my own relationships around me, the world around me. And so we tend to ignore, consciously speaking, we tend to ignore our identity. It's forming subconsciously in our lives, but we're navigating it constantly, and usually to forces external to us. When we become aware of our identity or our sense of self, most acutely is when we feel its loss. Okay, so if I tie my heart to a relationship, or to a job, or to my health or youth, or something like that, when I lose that friend, when I lose that job, when I lose the ability to do or be what I think I am, then I feel not just, here's the deal about loss. There's really two kinds we're going to unfold. There's surface loss. There's the objective, statistical, factual, circumstantial loss, like this person passed away, or this person broke up with me, or I got fired, or I didn't get the job. There's the loss on the surface, but if we tied any part of our identity to that thing, or that quality of life, then there's a deeper loss. There's a secondary loss. That's an identity loss. That's a sense of self. And it goes deeper, and it kind of undoes us. It kind of drops us into depression, despair, darkness, a real sense of lostness. Okay? Not just lost circumstantially on the surface, but a sense of lostness. Now, here's the hope. When you experience that, and you trust in Jesus, Jesus is doing something really significant in your life. You're going to begin to unfold the process of loss, the breaking down of identity, and the renewing and restoring the discovery of a new identity in Christ, and then how to live out of that identity. So I'm praying for you. I'm glad you're taking the journey. I am pulling for you. And I know if God does 1/10 of the work in your life in terms of reshaping and deepening and strengthening your identity through this study that he did in mine, then you're just going to be a different person after you study this book together and grow through this group. So blessings on you as you read, as you study, as you prepare each week, as you wrestle through these complex terms. Be patient with yourself. These are heavy things. They're deep things. And it takes a while to get your brain wrapped around them. Once you see these things, and once they become a part of your psyche and your heart, they really set you free. And so I'm looking forward to hearing your stories, and I know you'll enjoy the leadership.
Well, there you have it. Let me see if I can get this guy going back up here. So, as you can tell, that's why I let him set it up, because he's a lot more good with the big terms than I am. So, but basically, it's learning. I made the comment a couple weeks ago that maybe it was last week, that we tend as humans, especially as Christians really, we tend to prop ourselves up with a lot of external things. And, he alluded to that a little bit in that, and we'll get into it, but really when it boils right down to it, just almost a toothpick. Toothpicks that we're just really leaning on. And so it's a journey that, when he says that, it's legit. Like, we're kind of step by step trying to almost dissect what what we're after in this, and at the end we'll come walking away thinking, oh yeah, you know what, that's right. Because I think if we're not careful, we can know what's the right answer, but actually, like he said, like really truly getting right down to the depths of it. The picture on this book here, you can kind of see there's a guy at the bottom. It's almost like he's at the bottom of a crevice of some sort, and he's just looking up. And the idea there is really just when you've truly lost it all. Like, where are you? And it's not necessarily things, like he said. And so, without further ado, let's jump in. I mentioned Philippians 1 and verse 21, and then we will also address the different verses that are referenced on your list. Would you like a paper, Brother Larry?
Here, I got it.
Oh, you got, okay, good. Philippians 1, verse 21, of course, the Apostle Paul. Well, let's read verse 20. According to my earnest expectation and my hope that in nothing I shall be ashamed, but that with all boldness as always, so now also Christ shall be magnified in my body, whether it be by life or by death. Famous verse, familiar verse. For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. And I think as we unpack all of this, you're going to find out that's really the core of what we're after. Living is dying, and dying is living. It really doesn't make sense when you talk about it like you're just having a conversation with the world and I just have to lose everything to gain it. That's what is all encompassing in this. And so, he talked about it, and as you look there, the part 1 is losing, right? Part 1 is losing. Lesson 1, we're calling it trying hard. Mark 8:35 listed right there on your lesson sheet. For whosoever shall save his life shall lose it. And whosoever shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel's, the same shall save it. Jesus was speaking to his disciples in this setting. And he actually just kind of gotten on to Peter a little bit. One of the times he got on to Peter. But he had kind of gotten on to him, and he just kind of went into this. Hey, if you're not willing to lose, then you're really not ever going to gain. And, that again, that's a contrary message that the world has. You have to gain to gain, to be ahead, to actually have, and so as we look at this, and as we dive in, times of loss can actually be the starting point of a new journey. Most of the transformational spiritual journeys are those in which God opens our eyes to new understanding. He shines His light into unexplored places of our heart, gently, wonderfully redefines and reshapes us. Then He moves the Gospels from our head to our hearts during a lifetime of following Him. So, as we unpack all of this, that's what we're hoping for. We're hoping we can find our true identity in what it is actually in what it's actually intended to be. If you notice the subtitle of the book, How to Achieve or Receive, Not Achieve Your Identity. And it's funny to me because we're in this society, this culture, and I don't know the background behind, besides from what he sort of sets up in his book. In a time of culture and society where everybody's trying to re-identify them, and I say everybody, okay, the ones that are getting the attention are trying to re-identify themselves, and it just seems like everything, social media, your profile on Facebook or Instagram or whatever has to be updated, and all of these things is tied to that, and by and large, what we're going to come walking away with in this is really truly what we're after. And so let's look at how he starts there. First of all, we experience deep loss. We don't, I don't know that we completely understand, or I should say, we can go across the board here and say, well, that was deep loss. That's an individual experience, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. For me, it's going to look different than it will for my daughter, my wife, and anybody. Somebody could just we look at like a Naomi who loses 2 sons and a husband, or a Job and loses everything, but that we would say, well, that's pretty deep loss. Those are just, like he mentioned, kind of like the surface things that we all tie our identity to. And so when those things are gone, what are we left with? Right? And so that's the reason why I say you gotta, for him, he's really good at diving into the psychological and all that stuff, and this material is going to help us kind of piece that together in a better way, because I don't typically think in terms like that. I'm not good at really putting labels on okay, this is what this is, and this is how this is going to be defined, and so we're going to look at that as we walk through this. But when we experience that deep loss, then it actually reorients our priorities and our passions and our efforts. He mentions a story in here about his son. He and his son, they were living in California, and they actually went up to the mountains and went skiing. And it was sort of like a senior trip thing for his son. And they just got off the lift for the first run, and he had his skis on. His son was going to be snowboarding, and he decided to kind of go down. And his son's like, hang on, I'll catch up with you. And he's standing there waiting for a little while, and nothing, just, okay, that's kind of odd. So he unsnaps his skis and starts to kind of walk up the hill a little bit to find him. About that time, his son comes, boarding up to him and says, whoa. He's like, man, I think I hit my head. He goes, how long have we been here? And the guy, he looks at him, he says, well, how long do you think we've been here? And he says, I don't know, a couple days. And he's like, and that was my first, set of alarm that something happened. He just had a little bit too hard here, and so he made him take his board off. And went and visited the shack. Well, it turned out he had suffered a major concussion. Well, actually gave him some short-term memory loss in that, to where he, I mean, just his entire context was gone for this, especially in that day. And you know, in the book, he kind of talks about how he toys with them a little bit. I said, "What was I doing?" He said, "Well, I mean, you were jumping, you were doing, you know, flips, and and then he would ask again, "What just happened to me?" "Oh, you got hit by a truck," you know, and he's just playing with him, you know. But he realized, as at some point, that it was after they had left the hospital and they were driving down the mountain, that his son looks at him and he was just like, "Dad, where am I?" He just had this look of fear on his face, and he tries to set that up as sometimes for us, there are circumstances, things that'll take place in our lives, and for this gentleman, it was two different things that sort of unraveled that for him. And you know, one was a cancer battle, and then another one was just complete relocation. He was working in a thriving ministry in Southern California and got moved all the way across to the eastern side and lives in Connecticut now. And so that, you know, that shook his world. He was working in this thriving church, and now he lands in this little church that was struggling, and really, you know, New England is kind of a postmodern Christianity. You know, not that California is any better, but there are some regions of California that are still okay. And his culture, his context, I should say, was completely shaken. And it's at times like that we all find ourselves trying to reorient. Okay, where are we? Who am I? You know? And so that's the next phase we walk into, is then we start asking those deep questions. You start to say, now who am I? Right? Not that it was deep loss for us to move up here, but I remember when we got to Kansas, this was my first time really being in a spot where there was, like, I didn't know anybody. And now we were sort of friends with the church in Topeka that helped us out, and but I mean, we were living in Valley Falls. No offense, but we were living in Valley Falls, and do what?
Every offense.
But we're living in Valley Falls, and it was just like that first night. I remember laying there, and I'm like, "What are we doing?" You know, like, this is just crazy. We're here, you know, and not that was deep loss for us, because it was kind of a new start, but there are times that we can probably point to, and if not, I'm sure it will happen, where, okay, but who am I? And all of the things that we've sort of attached ourselves to have begun to crumble, or have crumbled, or really, some people in just, you know, in a moment, you know, just everything's just wiped out from underneath them. Who am I? You know, why am I here? You know, some people will ask that question. Why am I here? Why, like, you know, just locationally, Kansas, Meriden, you know, locationally, why am I on this earth? I feel like I have no purpose, like I'm not, you know, serving anything, you know. It feels like everything that I'm working for is just I'm not achieving anything, you know. And so there's those questions, and then it's the now what. So once you've kind of walked through the why am I here? Who am I? You know, now what? You know, those are kind of the deeper questions that we find ourselves asking in these times of loss. And if you've ever been there, you know that almost that, I don't know, it's sort of like, and he sets it up in here pretty good, like when you're in the lake, in a murky lake. I've never been there, but you're in a murky lake trying to find the top. You know, we watched this thing somebody told us about called, what was that? The underwater rescue thing that we did? Anyways, there's a crew that they just kind of took it upon themselves to take sonar equipment into these lakes where people went missing. And they find cars like in the water. And then they dive in the water, and they retrieve these cars, and many times they actually find, the person is in there. And but like as they're going down in the diving with the cameras and stuff on their heads, and it's all murky. And so that's my only because I don't swim and I'm not a diver or anything like that. So that's only how I can relate to this particular analogy, I should say. But when you're in that water and you're really trying to, where's the top? You don't know where it's at. Should I swim down? Should I swim up? And I know that that feeling can feel, I would imagine that feeling is pretty hopeless and helpless. And so he's trying to set it up as when we find ourselves in that loss, that all the things that we've sort of propped ourselves up on are now gone, then it can feel like we're just really grasping for the surface and we just don't know where it's at. Does that make sense? And so that's that part of it. But I wanted to read this. Ideally, life will go like this. We work hard in school, we graduate and pursue our dreams. We are told you can be whoever you want to be. Through hard work and over several years, we try diligently to build a sense of self and identity. Then, subconsciously, we tie our hearts to the things we achieve. We come to believe these things define us and give us security and meaning. We draw value and happiness from them in ways we don't consciously perceive or intend. They begin to own us. And even when the life work is harder than we expect, we press forward anticipating there's a payoff. Thinking someday, right? Somehow this is going to fulfill and secure me. But underneath all the trying, we subconsciously anchor our sense of self to weak things. Things that are fragile, losable, and breakable. Knowing we are tied to things that can come undone, we live in subtle fear, trying and hoping to secure ourselves and avoid deep loss. We bury our fear, tuck our fragility neatly out of sight and mind, and try to secure the self we are constructing. But we know at our core, life is inherently dangerous and can suddenly destabilize and toss us into deep loss. When identity loss actually unfolds, it's no fun. Losing our fragile selves is painful and emotional. In our desperation for answers and hope, we tend to replace the old, quote, house of cards with a new one, equally flawed. Scrambling for stability, we look for new places to root our hearts, a new relationship, a new job, a new social media profile, new people group. And we move from one weak place to another. We try on new selves, and each new identity will eventually fail us like the last one. The cycle repeats itself unless we break it. But how? Well, that's where God steps in and walks with us into deep loss. He's breaking us free from a broken cycle. See, that's what we're after. We can subconsciously, is the word he put there, subconsciously tie all of our identity and everything that identifies us and who I am, and the answers to those questions: who I am, who am I, why am I here, the now what. We can tie all of those things subconsciously, understanding that if that is gone, now what? Right? And which, by the way, I can, even as a pastor, just as an example, if this identifies me, it's losable, right? This, now I don't want it to be, like I'm getting a thrill and a kick out of being able to serve and just minister the way God has me. But by and large, God moves people around from time to time. God takes people home. God, whatever that case may be. So if He does that to me and my family, Like, am I now left to start questioning? And then as a church, sometimes a leadership shake-up, can shake the church family. So I think that what's important in this series really is that we're not necessarily tying our identities to, for example, as a church, we're not tying it to this guy. And I've tried to say that from day one. Do not lean on me as, yeah, I'm the pastor and that's the office God's given me, but listen, if God takes me away tomorrow, we shouldn't skip a beat and be here the next day. Still serving, still loving, still, hopefully next chapter, next verse. That's just my personal thing. But you know what I'm saying? Like, we shouldn't be like just so tied in that if the pastor's gone, I can't go to church there anymore. Right? Our security and our identity is literally wrapped up what we're after in Christ. And so let me find my spot here. I've kind of got off track, but first of all, when you go through some of these, not first of all, when we go through some of these relocations, these renovations in life, if you would, for us moving from Texas to Kansas, okay. Sometimes, if you go back through the journey, we can find ourselves maybe in resistance mode. Maybe you could think about your journey of God leading you to Cottonwood, or just some life decision that has you where you are now, and maybe that early resistance that you sensed, right? But now looking back, you realize, man, this was God all along, and man, I'm like, why did I do that? Why was I so hesitant? And it's because of the things around us that we were attaching everything to. We had our anchors in all of these little things that really are just fragile and really non-important in ways. And so I just want to set that up. If you realize this, with this man, he had a health battle with cancer rather. God brought him through that. Then he was moved all the way across the country. Those are two seasons that he points to in his life that were just times of loss for him. And moving clear across the country was God was just showing him, shaking him, and helping him understand just how vulnerable he is. And honestly, I've said this already, really in life, everything in life is losable. Think about that for a moment. I'm trying desperately to save up money. My wife and I save up money to buy a house, okay? But the reality of that is, plug your ears, is that we could buy the house tomorrow and it could burn down the next day, right? Now, that's obviously not, there's insurance and all that. She's a new house, but let's see here. But if we tie all of our identity to those things, and we're just really pouring in to have this and to have that, and I'm not saying we shouldn't. That's not what the idea is here. We're not saying now don't work hard for this because it could be losable, and don't try to have security because it could be. But if we tie everything to that, is what I'm saying, then we can set ourselves up for failure. Now I like this because theologically, he says, we could teach all the Bible answers. Biblically, we could quote the answers. But personally, in these seasons, we have to experience the answers. Some of you probably know what I'm talking about. You can know it, you can teach it, but you haven't experienced it. And that's something about, for example, Brother Prater that came and preached to us. Why can he have, and I don't know how many of you have been able to read that book that he sold, but how can he have such a powerful, impactful book like that? Just, 70, 60, 70 pages, right? Small book. That's just be impactful because he's walked through the loss, right? And he has found, if the theme that I picked up on, he has found the grace of God that is there. Didn't negate the loss, but the grace of God was there, sufficient for me, right? The grace of God that walked him through, that has brought him to this point. And so when he stands up to talk to someone who's lost their child, no, he's not exactly, in the same boat. It's a different story. It's a different, context. But he can still walk through them because he's experienced the answer. I can't. I can definitely take a book and try to pass it on. And, I can't walk with somebody in that. God gives us things in the Scripture, and we can try to work the best we can, but honestly, it's the experience that we need to make it through. So, what we know to be true is unavoidably being forced from our heads to our hearts in these times. So, as we walk through these trials, and as we walk through these losses, it's going to take God's loving and patient deconstruction and reconstruction process to help us out. That's just understand that God is lovingly trying to reconstruct. He's deconstructing, and then he's going to reconstruct. I think it's in the next lesson or two, but he talks about Peter and how really he had to kind of lose himself to become who he actually was, and that's going to get set up. I was thinking it was in here, but it's not. So that's just a forewarning. You'll know that's coming down the pike. All right. So, anyways, so we're perpetually haunted by comparison, the opinions of others, competition, fear. We're forever trying to measure up to the world around us, and when we do, we feel good. When we fail, we feel lost. Everybody there? The term "keeping up with the Joneses." I don't know where that came from, but it's whoever the Joneses are apparently had it all. So, keeping up with the Joneses. That's I think that's increased since social media and Facebook, right? Because then they're out there putting it, oh, look at my new car, look at my new house, look at my new outfit, look at my new, right? So we're all just like trying to keep up. Or at least that proclivity, that sense, that desire that I got to keep up with that, and if I don't, I'm not succeeding. Well, therefore I must be a failure, right? And so we measure it up by all those things. Our faith and sense of self are often constructed with faulty, performance-based, try harder materials. Now this is substantive as far as when it relates to a church context, okay, specifically, because by and large, religion and church culture it can project that on us. If you don't, then you're not. If A plus B automatically equals, right? And so, and how many people have been hurt by that? God is not, if we haven't figured it out by now, just by reading Scripture, God's not and I'm going to sound weird when I say this, God is not an A plus B equals C God. Like, He is like outside the box. And He wants to do a unique work in everybody's life. And so, as a Christian, our desire ought to be which is pleasing God. Okay? Like, all I want to do is please God. And then whatever that looks like for me, I'm okay with. Pleasing God for the Apostle Paul turned out, him landing in prison over and over again. Beaten, stripes, stoned, and eventually shipwrecked. He's on the whole list, right? Bitten by a serpent. And this man he suffered, right? But at the end of the day, he was able to say, yeah, those things that I counted gain, they were all loss. for Christ. So everything that the world would say, hey, you should get, you should have your 401k packed up, make sure that you have all the support you need as a minister, running around, traveling and preaching. And by the way, that's important, right? We have to live and support our families. But I mean, the world will say, if you don't have this, then don't do this, and don't, even the churches will say, hey, you got to do this, got to do this. Paul, by the end of his journey, by the end of his life, was like, you know what? I just want to please him. I'm just pressing towards the mark. I just want him to get the glory. And that's really where it should land for us. Otherwise, all of the little things that we're striving for, not that we shouldn't strive for. I want to strive to raise good kids, and I hope they turn out. But what if turning out to God means something different than what it means to me? Am I going to be okay with that? I hope so. I just want him to be pleased, right? And I can say that, but really in practicality, if she, goes off and does this, and he goes off and does that, and they're not fitting the mold that I have, then is my identity gone as a good parent? Or, if they just decide to rebel and, maybe that's how God, not that it was his will to rebel, but maybe he's saying, hey, I knew they were going to rebel. I put them in your home because they're going to rebel, and I wanted to see how you respond. It could just be. I don't know. Okay, most of these things we won't know until we get to heaven. But we do have to know that he has a sovereign plan, and he absolutely wants to do something for us. So, I skipped over this, so bear with me. We want deep renovation. So at a foundational level, we want deep renovation. We're looking for that new identity. Is this in your notes? Okay, good. We're looking for that new identity, but this is exciting and fearful. Okay? So when we find ourselves in this loss, we're like, okay, we find ourselves frantically scrambling for this, scrambling for that, and ultimately we're fearful but also excited because maybe, just maybe, I'm going to find this new identity, right? So then, at this point, we then discover deep needs. A need for something stable. A need for something. A need for a Savior. And the overwhelming theme of this series is it has to come back to Christ. Oh, you're just being cliche. Sure, call it what you will. But at the end of the day, if we don't find it in Christ, it's all going to come crumbling down and crashing down on us. And we will find ourselves just frantically scrambling and struggling, looking for the new us, the new me, the new. So too often, though, we are ill-equipped to understand how faith in Jesus informs and transforms our true identity, and therefore unexpected loss will jolt us to the core. Do they have it in here? They do. Okay, here's your identity, and we're walking down this. We'll have a few things we can talk about later on. But your identity it's described as your deepest idea of who you are. It is the story you tell about yourself. Subconsciously, it drives everything else in life. The definition of you that you have adopted. Your source of trust. Where you subconsciously look for meaning and validation. Right? So I think probably back to the parents thing. I'm trying to be relatable here. For us, it's like, okay, if they're doing good in school and if they're, obeying us, and, if they're, I don't know, taking a bath on their own, and, whatever that looks like, right? So then it's like, okay, you know what? I'm doing a valid job because they're doing good in school. They took a bath. They're brushing their teeth on their own. They're behaving in church, right? All of those things. And if we're tying all of that, like that's my validation as a parent. I'm a good parent, which it's all on her. She's the best part of this. Any good thing you see here, it's on my sweetheart. When you see them misbehaving, point right here. Okay, just that's pastor's fault right there. So all their stinkerness is me. So no, but reality is we can tie our identities to that. So identity is that deepest idea of who you are, the story you tell about yourself, where you subconsciously look for meaning. So we all have identity. We want and need solid or truthful one, and we work to construct and secure the one that we believe is best. This identity causes us to think, this is me, this is my fit. In times of upheaval or personal loss, subconscious who am I questions are thrust from the backstage to the front stage of our lives. Out of the shadows into the light of examination and contemplation, we are forced to reckon with either a strong or weak identity, and whether our process for shaping it is valid or vulnerable. Identity is not only factually who I am, but more influentially it is who I think I am. For we all tend to believe the things we tell ourselves about ourselves. Yet, what I think about me won't be enough. A strong identity requires objective facts outside of myself. What I think will need to be validated, right, by some external, reliable authority. So, you get the endorsement from whomever. You get the, take a jab at him. I don't think this is how he is, but, he gets the big review writer in his book. You get a ranting review. We get a ranting review on Cottonwood's, Google page or whatever. Now all of a sudden, we're doing a good job, right? That's our validation because we got a good review. And that's a lot of times where people tie that identity. It's like, okay, I know this is who I am. And then externally we get the good review from the boss or from the family member, the friend or whomever, and now all of a sudden we're in, right? We're in. Regardless of my identity will always be partially a product of what I think, which is internal process, and what others say, the external. In other words, identity is structured from both without and within, and it's both a process of discovery and development. So, though the term identity is familiar in our cultural conversation, personal identity formation takes shape as a subtext of life, like breathing. It's involuntary function of the soul, like a fish. Is a fish aware of water? I don't know, I've never asked them, so. Were the early humans aware of gravity? Likewise, most people are not consciously aware of their identity. Few ever pause long enough to consider how they are forming forming a self. But the fear of it falling apart, or the evident anxiety when it does, reveals the inherent fragility of our identities. Right? And people work frantically to keep this up. Frantically. And we were having a conversation just before church started about just the families, young families, and how culture and society has targeted them with sports and activity, and man, it is just absolutely wrapping young families up. Why? Well, they sign their kids up, so I should sign my kids up. And then, I guarantee you, if we went across this room, some of you older folks, you would say, there is so much more sports now than there was when I was growing up. I mean, they're starting them like right in the hospital, I think. You want to play hockey? Sure, okay. You can't even skate, just a baby. Okay, but get out there. We got a wheelchair for little babies. So they're starting them so young, right? And there's a reason for that. The world is looking like they're just trying to find their identity. Well, did you see how good Junior was doing? Like, God, I'm good because my son is excelling in golf. My daughter is now a whatever, right? And we find our identities in that. And unfortunately, when that crumbles, the injury happens, the career-ending injury happens, Now it's like, what happened? Right? And so we have to work on that. But God calls identity our inner being, our soul, if you would, and desires that this part be strengthened with power through His Spirit. When this inner self is weak, we feel frustrated, anxious, fearful, defeated, and unhappy. When it is strong, we feel secure, fulfilled, valuable, purposeful, and happy, at least temporarily. This is the unseen dynamic that often drives our emotions, our behaviors. God also refers to our identity as the heart. In Proverbs 4:23, He says, "Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life." With our hearts, our identities is that deep. If you look that word up in the concordance, the dictionary really kind of like that center of emotions, the center of the will. It's the motherboard, if you would, of the computer, the main driving processing chip, if you would. And God calls the heart. He says, "Hey, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life." Challenges, and so God challenges us to guard and maintain it carefully because it is actually connected to all other facets of life. The subconscious "who I am" questions always demand answers and yet are never fully, permanently satisfied with answers our temporal, fragile world provides. For this reason, these questions are also haunting because of the intrinsic weakness of the balsa wood processes we've adapted, or the toothpicks, if you would. Past success is never enough for an unbreakable future identity, as our identity continues to demand greater success or sustained security. Does everybody understand what that's saying, right? Like, the Tiger Woods, one major championship wasn't good enough for that guy. Even the world, right? He would not have been considered a success if he would have just stopped with one, right? And so, but then he goes out and wins all those majors, and the moment he has a crash, the moment he ends up on the side of the highway with a police officer giving him a drug test, he's a failure, right? And unfortunately for the guy, like I believe his doctrinal core is wrong, and he's not. I've read on his religious beliefs, he's off. Unfortunately for the guy, maybe he'll find the truth, but that's a good example. What we all know of as someone who has a shaky foundation. The world considered him successful. Now, right? And if we're not all careful, we can look for that kind of success. Well, if I don't have 7 major accomplishments in this field, then I'm no longer successful. And that's not what we're after. But obviously, the world and the society demands more and consistent. Okay, you did it once, keep going. Otherwise, on the other hand, past failure demands ongoing reconstruction of a new, better identity. Penance, reparations, and reinventions to compensate for the flawed self. Failed identity demands that we start over, try harder, build better. Either way, identity built on success or failure becomes a monster we cage and feed, and eventually eats through the cage and devours us as well. I think we all can agree with that. So, amidst all this trying to achieve identity, we are conflicted, intuitively desiring to be more than what we do. Our core identity simply must be more than the sum of our successes or failures. We yearn to be valued for who we really are and to fully know our truest selves. So if we build the weak things, we must try feverishly to protect our creation from loss. When it collapses, we try hard to hide the shame and fake it, only to rebuild using alternate flimsy materials. In this sense, the concept of identity is either stronger or weak. It motivates or demotivates. You've seen people experience that type of loss where, okay, I have no hope. I'm just going to go. They just fall into, like he says, it's not depression, but people just sink off. There's no hope. I mean, I've lost all of this. I have nothing to live for. And listen, that just should not be the case for believers. Shouldn't. Because we have a better hope. And like I said, at the end of the day, it should land at Jesus Christ. So identity formation is the phrase we will use for how we construct our main identity. It's the process we trust to define ourselves. Every waking moment, we subconsciously work to establish, maintain, or improve our identity. Everybody builds an identity from one of three sources. So on the journey ahead, we are going to contrast all three, two fragile sources and one durable, trustworthy source. Growing in, obviously, this third option transforms and grounds our hearts deeply and authentically. So let's discover God's identity process. If you belong to Him, it will help you trust what He's doing to redefine and refine you. It will give you hope and anticipation of the new identity He is shaping within you. If you don't yet belong to Him, understanding God's heart for you may make you want to be His child as well. So I hope that helps you understand where we're headed. It's understanding that there's going to have to be loss. And I believe we get into this next lesson, but it's, we have to yield that up to Jesus. And let Him define everything that we need. So let me see here. I think we already spoke of some of this. Discussion questions. Do you have on there? First question, I mainly wanted to answer that one. What fragile things do people often build their lives on? And we can just kind of discuss this here and maybe be done after this. You want to speak up or raise your hand, it doesn't matter to me. What are some fragile things that people... Wealth, absolutely. And how's wealth fragile?
The stock market.
There you go. Absolutely. Stock market. Yes, sir.
Your careers.
Career, absolutely.
Today you've got a job, tomorrow you don't. You lost your career.
Yeah, right, absolutely.
Few children. But I mean, when I was raising my kids, you know how it's supposed to be God and then spouse, and mine was kids. Thank God. So then when my kids slowly started leaving home, I was devastated.
Yeah.
I even had one of my daughters tell me, she says, I'm going to have to do things different, because she said, you just live lost, and I don't want to look like you someday. I don't think she meant it to quite be as harsh as it come out, but
Point taken.
almost right.
Okay, okay.
I think
Ouch.
that's really hard for
It is.
the
It's
moms.
crushing. It's
Sure.
crushing when they leave. Especially when you know they're not coming back.
Because you do wonder,
That's the hard part.
who am I now? I've always been mom, I've always taken care of kids when they're gone.
Yeah.
It's huge. Bigger than I ever dreamt it would be.
Absolutely.
On things
I'm sorry?
in this world, like on things in this world, like a game, like TV, yeah, TV or sports.
There you go. Yeah. The things that this world has to offer, sports,
You can't play no more?
yeah.
Yeah.
That when I was locked into sports a lot more, I sensed in my spirit, like when my team didn't win, like the next day, like it was just like, I had to fight through that, I pulled for Penn State and I should just know, huh?
Broncos lost again.
Broncos lost again? Are we surprised? No. But no, I was actually shocked when they won. No. But like for Penn State, they always had enough. Seemed like they all had just enough to put just a good enough team to lose, at the end. But you would just, it was like, man, we're so good. We're even hanging with some of these big teams, and boom, the loss, right? And you feel like, man, you almost feel like burning the shirt and burning the, But anyways, what's that?
Get rid of the cap.
Get rid of the cup. No, she got this for me. Clayton? Accomplishments. There you go. Absolutely. That's it. Yes, ma'am.
Expectation. You think your life's going to turn a certain way, you do certain things, and it doesn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Very much so. Very much so. So we can see how those things can become that, whatever that is, that loss, that, or maybe we've tied, our identity into some of those things. But I think what's, you probably saw it kind of working itself out in this first chapter, but just kind of like pulling that down a little bit and kind of recognizing it and understanding we're getting somewhere, but ultimately we're trying to land with Christ. And we know we're getting there, but how he lays it out, I think, is good for us. So, anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Did you purposely skip over, or did I just miss it? You said our identity is from one of the three sources. Did you say what three? What?
No, he doesn't go into it. I think he's going to unpack that. Yeah, that's the cliffhanger. That's the teaser at the end of the show that you have to come back next week and watch. Do what?
I wrote that much down.
You ready? He doesn't write it in here. What'd you say? Dot, dot, dot?
Actually, I learned about that in school.
What's
I
that?
read the book.
There's three sources that we get our identity. Two are fragile and one's sustainable. And that was a cliffhanger he left in there for. It's really setting up there's going to be a couple sections that he'll talk about in the series, so that's funny.
I was waiting.
It's a dot, 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 y'all. It's a dot, dot, dot. Thank you. Okay.
Question mark, question mark, question mark.
Yeah.